Hey, welcome to Amy and Megan talking about stuff. We were just going over a few settings, but we're also looking at sitting here and doing kind of some podcasts. We were talking about novelty and where and how to set up, and I surprised Megan by starting the recording.
Works for me.
And now I don't know what to say because that's so typical. You all of a sudden the demand and the executive function and the brain goes blank.
Well, it's like, well, where to start? So the podcast name we came up with is Control Alt Think. And our goal is to just really have conversations about whatever topics to do with neurodivergence we find interesting each time.
Yep, and a lot of that is sort of some compare and contrast, but also just a lot of time to go, oh, you think about it like that? Here's how it comes out for me, and do some validating potentially of the experience of others, but also just for ourselves to get some more insight on how we operate in the world.
Yeah, so we were talking a little bit about how we set up for our calls. We were trying to figure out our cameras and our microphones and lighting and creature comforts and things like that we were talking about. Both of us are coaches, and so we've talked about where how we sit and where we sit and what we use for our coaching calls, and how the podcast would be similar or different, or and
And
that's how Novelty came up.
yep. So, and novelty is, really something that drives both of us, but can also be super overwhelming if there's too much of it or at the wrong time. Mm.
Yes, expected novelty. It's lovely. Anticipated, planned.
Controlled novelty. Now, if
Yes,
the world actually operated that way 95% of the time, that would be great. It
yes.
doesn't.
Telling my child that we're going to move the furniture around because we need more space in a certain area, and then making it fun because there's now a fort in the middle of my living room, which I mean, there was before, but now it's a cooler fort.
So you were using expected novelty with him? Is that what I'm hearing out of that?
Yeah, so a lot of times if there's going to be a change, like giving heads up or practicing. So if, like for me, the novelty of making a change or going somewhere new or doing something different, but then the expected part of it is planning ahead or almost like pretending to experience it ahead of time. So when we travel or even like my husband and I, our first date was an entire weekend in Memphis. It was kind of like we met online, so it was sort of like a blind date, but we had already talked. And so I went through Google Maps and found all the things that he and I had said we were interested in doing. And I made a spreadsheet of like, these are all the things. This is what it costs. This is how far it is from our hotel. This is the hours that it's open. Yes, I have issues because I made a spreadsheet to go on a date, but that was the expected part of the novelty. So we could just print that out or pull up the Google Maps on our phone or whatever and say, okay, well, now that we're here, what do we feel like doing? So it's still novel, but we know what the expectations are. We know whether it's within our budget or not, or how much it's going to cost that day. You don't show up and then it's not open. So we kind of do the same thing or are teaching our kids to handle anxiety in a similar way of, well, what do you know about the situation ahead of time? How can you make yourself more comfortable? So that's like expected novelty in
Expected.
our house.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And so much of that too is like how much of it is related to executive function or dysfunction and short-term working memory and the ability to hold and process all that stuff at the same time. And so pre going through the motions of stuff like that seems like it could take some of the burden off of working memory.
I think there's a little bit of that. I feel like a lot of times I'm slower than the rest of the world, probably because I'm trying to process more information than a typical person might be. So then in the moment to be able, the decision factors are already all there, and then you can just decide more quickly versus having to sit there and do everything, all the searching or thinking in the moment. For me, it's also an anxiety thing, I think. So knowing even like, okay, if we've decided that we're going to go to the museum or the zoo or a restaurant or whatever, looking up the details ahead of time, what's the menu, what's the map of the place look like, all of those things, it takes some of the executive functioning off, but it also gives me a feeling that I already know the space that I'm going to, or what things are going to be there or whatever. It takes some of the unknowns out of it, which I feel like reduces anxiety a little bit, which is also a big neurodivergent struggle.
Totally fair, totally legitimate. And circling back to why we're even having these conversations, I feel like a little bit of it, relates to that controlled novelty. But it was something we were both interested in for a variety of reasons. We don't know exactly where these conversations are going to go yet. Our intention at the moment is that they're mostly unscripted. We may change that format as we progress, but for the moment, we're kind of free forming. But also, this is something that we both have some pretty deep knowledge about, both from personal interest, but also from lived experience. And to be able to bounce that off somebody else who has a similar deep interest really appeals to me.
Yeah, and it's surprising to me that it doesn't make either of us super anxious or nervous because we don't have a plan, uh, which is kind of odd for both of us. Um, but yeah, like everything we've talked about so far today, it's just whatever comes up, and there is no plan or, like you said, we might change that in the future, but we do both have similar deep interests, and I would say not the same lived experiences, but overlapping lived experiences or different perspectives of some of the same, um, I guess the same traits, but seeing them in different ways or experiencing them in different ways, and different paths to get to where we each are.
Yeah,
And then we have that shared uh, coach approach to life, and our professional interests overlap quite a bit.
I'd love to hear how you see your new venture, Focus Like a Mother, relating to any of the things we've hit on so far.
Interesting when I think about the way that our brains work and the way the pieces that are changing when we're becoming parents and mothers especially. One of those pieces is related to sensory processing. There's, emotional processing that's related. There are a lot of different pieces that are related that tie into some of the things that we're talking about. So, like anxiety is a big thing that comes up postpartum for a lot of mothers and parents in general, fathers too. And so I see some of those things, um, not the experience being the same, but some of the coping strategies can be used in both scenarios of neurodivergence as well as just, neurotypical, but going through a lot of different transitions and changes. Um, the one that I'm still curious on learning more about is the sensory piece,
Uh-huh.
just because I have a lot of lived experience learning about sensory processing related struggles. And moms are often saying how overstimulated they are. So I'm interested in exploring those kinds of things more. But the concept of focus like a mother just goes right in line with executive functioning. It's just for different reasons and on a different journey.
Well, I look forward to learning from you and hearing more as we kind of go in that direction. Is there anything else you want to hit on in the next couple minutes as we kind of move towards wrapping up this test recording?
Well, Amy, what do you looking forward to most in relating your creative catapult work into our conversations?
I think a lot of it's really fleshing out the ideas by having some conversations with people when I'm or a co-host as it may be, when I'm not in the moment coaching. Because I've got some interest and some fascination in the neurochemistry and neurobiology of creativity and sensory input and how that creates our lived experience, but then also how we live our lives. But trying to pick this apart while I'm trying to hold space for people processing big emotions and big things just doesn't work.
Mm,
And I've done so much thinking about this stuff over the years, but I don't think in any sort of dialogue type of way. And so I'm looking forward to having some dialogue and just seeing where and how that comes back to my own coaching and the influence and what I'm bringing to my work with clients and frankly in my own life as well.
mm. Yeah, that makes sense to me as a coach, but uh, it will be exciting to be able to have those dialogues and to be able to have the back and forth, which is a different space to hold than our usual respective coaching spaces.
It's kind of funny because this sounds so formal and, yeah, you and I have some really, fun moments where we've been talking and just gone repeatedly. Well, or I've gone repeatedly, "Ooh, we should be recording this." And, trying to take it down from a little bit of formality as we're both trying to think on the fly and go, what in the world are we doing to, just really some humanizing of this and kind of what I expect to be kind of a fun interaction for you and I, and hopefully anyone who stumbles across this and identifies with pieces of it.
Yeah, and hopefully as we go, if people do stumble across it and identify with it or have questions or other thoughts, then hopefully we can start to open up other, they'll be able to comment or ask a question, and then that'll get you and I on a down a whole nother rabbit hole.
Rabbit hole. But yeah, and I think for right now, we very well may post this, but know that this is like a 0 episode. This is like a test. Do our mics even work? And so
Yes.
there will be nothing real formal with this if you do see it. Who even knows what we'll edit out or not?
Yes. So we'll see how it goes.
All
But
right.
yay for episode 0 of Control Alt Think.
I'm Amy with Creative Catapult Coaching and my co-host,
I'm Megan with Focus Like a Mother Coaching.
and we'll talk to you soon.